Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by Lex Bradshaw-Zanger, who's the Chief Marketing and Digital Officer for L'Oreal UK and Ireland, having previously to that worked in L'Oreal Paris for a big part of his career. I'm really excited to talk to Lex because Lex and I share a passion about the future of marketing and the role of technology and digital in that. And Lex has had a kind of diverse career where he's transversed kind of different parts of brand, also having worked at McDonald's, also worked at a big kind of media owner technology company in Facebook, and also done stints at WPP and a variety of creative agencies like Leo Burnett. So I think Lex brings a really interesting perspective to the table. He's also a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing and of the Marketing Academy. So probably no one better kind of place to be able to talk about the future of marketing and the role of digital and technology in that. So Lex, welcome.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for the invitation and that flattering intro.
I do my best. So Lex, we always start in the same place, which is just trying to understand if you had a big red reset button on your table in front of you, what would you hit reset on within the kind of marketing discipline as a whole?
You know, I'm going to be a bit obnoxious with that, and I'm going to reset your electronic button with the word digital, because you know I've been in digital my whole career. I think I've always been on the digital spin, whether it's agency side or client side. But really, that's a word that needs a massive reset. You know, digital is just the new shiny pointed end of marketing. And when I talk to a lot of our marketers, I have a sort of catchphrase that I try and beat them over the head with, which is that marketing hasn't changed, but marketers have to change. So marketers need to understand what digital means. They need to understand how the fundamentals operate in the world and the ecosystems we operate in today. But digital is not a thing. TVs are digital, air conditioning is digital. I was always the one that had to fix the overhead projector when it wasn't plugged in properly. That's digital too. But it does need a big reset. We need to put it into perspective and understand what it means within the real ecosystem of what marketing is trying to do.
Right. No, I like that. I often talk about, instead of digital marketing, it's marketing in a digital world or a digital first world. But you're right. But there are still a lot of people that have got digital in their title. There are still a lot of kind of sessions within businesses that are just about digital. So how do you get the right balance between accepting that it's everywhere whilst also kind of hothousing it?
Yeah, no, and I've got digital in my title too, and I'm very proud of it. I don't want to be an old fogey who's very boring and stuck in the last century. I think there's a real notion of making sure you've got experts and generalists, and that you understand the deep expertise that you need within the digital space, whatever it might be, digital data, technology, how all those things work. But at the same time, those people are very, very aware of the context in which they operate in, and it's not just digital for digital's sake. And that's where it's all about the people, right? It's the structure of the teams. It's having the expertise where you need it, but joining that together with fundamentals and traditional marketing at the same time.
Yeah, nice. I like the way you put that. And I guess L'Oreal was probably one of the earlier kind of pioneers of really kind of putting digital at the core of its business and upskilling kind of people across the board, not just in marketing, in kind of digital and technology. So I'd love you to maybe just share a little bit about the journey that you've seen L'Oreal go on and kind of how you think about digital transformation. Do you think of it as digital transformation, or do you just think of it as transformation, given what you just said?
So I love this question because I think we talk for hours on it. So I think that there's a piece about transformation, and I'll say over and over again that I think marketing is art and science, and so it's constantly transforming. And so there are lots of different transformations going on: digital transformation, e-commerce transformation, data transformations. So I think the one thing we have to accept is that transformation is ongoing, it's never ending, and so we need to keep thinking about what's coming ahead. One of the big attractions for me coming to L'Oreal was really the way, so our previous chief digital officer, our previous CEO had really approached this. And L'Oreal is above all a people organization. And there was this real understanding of the strength of the organization is in the people, the strength of the organization is in the culture. And so how do you inject digital transformation into that? And so I think probably one of the key decisions that they made, whether actively or passively, but I think really the winner was to say that you can have digital experts in the organization atomized across every different team in every different function, as long as they understand that they're part of another community that sits on top of that. And we have a lot of matrix structures in the organization, so that makes that work. But it wasn't about creating a digital silo, a specific digital organization that sits apart, because that creates frictions with IT, creates frictions with marketing. So it's about having these people all across the organization, embedded with their functions, embedded with their teams, but also being able to feel part of a community and not feel isolated.
I love that term you used, atomized. It's a really interesting thought. Actually.
I'm sorry, that's my French coming through and not my using
Of
English.
course, yeah. There's also make it concrete. I remember from my Havas days. I need to see it more concretely. There are certain phrases. You're right. Atomized is a very French kind of way of thinking, isn't it? So, I mean, L'Oreal's been early to things like e-commerce. It's been early to influencers, but you're still at heart, you would be seen as a more traditional business versus some of the kind of direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses that all did very well during COVID. Yet you guys had phenomenal success during COVID. Your numbers were quite impressive. Like, what do you put that down to?
Well, so thanks for the pin on the impressive numbers. I think you're right. You know, there's a big spectrum of sort of digital native, direct-to-consumer brands, and then maybe larger legacy FMCG organizations. You know, it's difficult to be objective to start with. You know, when you sit inside an organization, you hear what people like you tell us. I hear being told that we're further ahead in the large corporate space. I'm always kind of tempted to push forward and to go faster. I think there's one piece that L'Oreal does differently, which is this permanent quest for innovation and looking ahead and looking around the corner and trying to understand and learn in a space. And I think particularly in e-commerce, that helped us a lot. You know, I tell the story a lot about, you know, how long does it take a consumer to go from being an offline consumer to an online consumer, or both? You know, just take their credit card out of their wallet, type the numbers in, and they're done. How long does it take for an organization to put a product online and sell it? You know, there's supply chain, there's content, there's payment systems, there's probably technology depending on how you sell it. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So we know that to be in that space ready for the consumer, you've got to start before them because it takes longer. So there's this notion of seizing what's starting. It's one of the French sayings at L'Oreal, saisir ce qui commence. And it's about saying, okay, this is something new. Let's go and test it. Let's go and learn. And you know, the flip side example of that is that we're working with TikTok on their TikTok shop at the moment. It's not a big business opportunity, but understanding how it works, playing with it, figuring out the content and the people. You know, that's how you learn, and that's how you're more agile and more ready when it goes big.
It's super refreshing, and I would entirely agree with you. I mean, if you're not in that early majority, then you're going to lose any competitive advantage. And being right at the tip of it obviously means that you really can kind of benefit from insight that others don't. But
there's a funny thing. Yeah. Sorry, no. But before you go on, there's a funny thing in the digital space is that it's very hard to learn what to do from a textbook or from a piece of paper. And so, you know, somebody said once that digital is like a sport. You've got to practice it to learn it. You know, you can't learn a sport on a piece of paper. And so everything that is digital, you've got to try it. You've got to go out there and fall into the pitfall, the potholes, and figure it out. So that's why it's really important to try stuff.
It's a really great point, actually. It's not one I'd really thought about, actually, that you learn by experimenting and testing in digital. And of course, the wonderful thing is you get data, you get feedback pretty fast, as lots of startups throwing MVPs into market have always found. And it strikes me that you kind of incubate innovation by encouraging entrepreneurship internally in your organization, encouraging people to act a little bit like startups where, I mean, I've worked in them, where people encourage kind of Facebook adage, done is better than perfect, or don't fear failure. But how do you, in a large organization, a corporate, actually ensure that people kind of actually don't get, if things don't work and you're constantly testing and it doesn't deliver sales uplift or it doesn't deliver what's expected, how do you build a culture, I guess, of acceptance and learning rather than kind of admonishing failure? Because I don't think many big businesses get that right.
I don't think we're great at admonishing failure. I don't think we're scared of it, though. I think there's two. One thing is to say, okay, this isn't working, just cut and run. I think we can do that. So I think relatively often we talk about things and say, look, give it one last try, and then if it doesn't work, just move on to something else. I don't think we're very good at kind of shouting from the rooftops and saying, this is incredible, this is a failure. we did have at one point going around the group these things called fuck up nights, excuse my French, which is sort of pizza and beer and talking about failures, and that was good. That was kind of a core community of real digital people, real people who liked doing that sort of thing. So I think on the one hand, there is not being scared of failure. I think we know how to take risks and we know how to learn. And on the other side, this piece about, not as much as some tech companies where they say you've got 15% of your time to carve out and do new stuff. But we know that we need to be pushing the envelope all the time, figuring out, you said it in your intro, I'm super interested in the future of marketing. And I sit on a number of different groups and boards trying to figure that out. And nobody has the answer, but just trying to think 2 steps ahead or around the corner and then testing is the way to learn.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. And what do you do as a leader personally? How do you encourage that culture and encourage and coach and mentor people to kind of embrace this? Because people need reminding, don't they? Because they tend to get stuck in their to-do list and kind of in their desk mentality, particularly in a remote world. I think when you haven't got people around you, innovation sometimes can get stifled. So I'd love to know how you go about leading.
I start a bit with myself on that. I like to learn and I like to teach and in different ways. So I definitely like to learn. I'm the person that's frustrated watching the TV and not knowing how the TV works. So I'm always having to Google something or read something. So I always want to understand a little bit more about how something's working. So for me, and particularly in marketing, if marketing's art and science and always changing, then you need to be learning all the time. So there's a bit about learning that I think is really important. And in our space, learning comes in so many different forms, looking at what other people are doing, talking to people, trying to test things out. And then the teaching piece, I'll be honest. So when I was doing my MBA and everybody else was doing internships at merchant banks and consulting companies, I went and trained to be an English teacher for a summer. And I found that I loved teaching. Okay, maybe I was not very good at grammar, but I love teaching. And I found that comes into my role in marketing. I really enjoy talking to students about their careers, talking about marketing. We have a deep partnership with the Oxford MBA and we work with them a lot. So I've tried to bring both of those things to bear inside the organization. So from a learning point of view, we do different learning programs in different ways. We send out a lot of stuff that people need to read. We have speakers coming in, and then we have specific learning programs for different levels of the organization. And hopefully that's a way to sort of keep people enthused about the future of what they're doing, maybe thinking a little bit about the meta side of their job rather than just doing marketing. How's marketing changing?
Right.
I know that works for me. I hope it works for others as well.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds really inspiring. I think leaders have to show by example as well as kind of deal with the tough stuff. And I think kind of being hands-on and then teaching and actually dropping down to the level and actually really just moving in on a journey with someone is a real, that whole servant leadership thing. I think maybe in Europe we're a little bit like, it's a bit of an Americanism and we're not very comfortable with it, but there's something in that sentiment that actually you're there to serve the people that work for you and to take problems out of their way and help them to get better at what they do. And it strikes me that you really put that at the core of your role.
And I really enjoy that, to be honest. I really enjoy kind of trying to help people get out of their day-to-day and think about what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. And so that comes in both, in the work of marketing that they're doing, but also in their careers. How are you going to advance your career? There's such a big challenge today of what people learn at school in the marketing space and the reality when you get into a job. There's an enormous gap there.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe let's zoom out a little bit to more of the industry. You talked about how you create this culture of innovation, curiosity, and innovation in L'Oreal. I often talk to marketers or see marketing organizations where perhaps that same curiosity for new technology and getting deep into it isn't necessarily there. I wonder, if you were looking at the discipline of marketing, what would you say that marketeers need to get better at when they turn up to the board table?
My goodness, that's a tough question. We used to talk about T-shaped marketers, one speciality and a bit of generalism. I think now we're moving to M because you need a few. There's two pieces to your question. There's one is what do marketers need to do differently sort of to evolve? And then there's another bit about the boardroom. I think those are probably two slightly different ones. I think that the first one is that we all need to get better at balancing data and strategy versus kind of creativity, and emotion. And it's really about balancing. It's not about abandoning one or the other. I think then, the boardroom question is a harder one. The boardroom question is about KPIs and indicators and really reminding everyone about what marketing does. Marketing is about growth. And so it's about making sure that there's a real connection between marketing activities and growth and financial results, because at the end of the day, those are the ones on the P&L. That's not always easy. I have a couple of finance degrees. I don't have a marketing degree, or at least not in that sense. So I may be more comfortable with the numbers and the P&L, but some marketers aren't. But those are the discussions that happen at the boardroom.
Yeah, no, I agree. You've got to be able to demonstrate how marketing investment is contributing to growth in the business, even if that's not all in the short term. I think the biggest challenge is the short term, long term piece, right?
And you use the word marketing investment rather than marketing spend. It's just nuances like that are so important.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I see there's also this. I think most businesses struggle with how do you prove the kind of long term versus the short term. I mean, art and science, as you talked. I mean, digital gifted us lots of ways to get to customers kind of more easily and collect data, but we also shot ourselves in the foot early on with digital. We're saying that everything you do delivers a response pretty fast. And of course, it's just like any other communication or marketing in that some does, but not all of it. And people don't behave like that. So how do you in a digital team, I guess, there's a skew towards technology, machine learning, data science, because those things can really drive tangible kind of growth and you can point at them. So how do you get the right balance between that and some of the more kind of, we just need to test some of these new things, these more kind of creative tech, emotive things, because they could work, but we haven't. How do you get that right balance between the two?
I think it's a question of measurement. Maybe I'm being too simplistic. Actually, you remind me of that joke, what's the best thing about the internet? You can measure everything. And what's the worst thing about the internet? Well, you can measure everything. I think that part of the answer to your question is about measurement and KPIs. Because we've talked for a long time. I'm always surprised about how much people still don't understand last touch attribution and multi-touch attribution, for example. And, that's exactly what you said. We got into a world of data and performance and technology where you could measure everything. And so suddenly, just put all your money in search because that's the only thing that's driving revenue. Well, that's not the case. I think on these points about technology and new technology, I think what we always need to do is think really hard about what the KPIs are and how they ladder up. If your broadest KPIs are, what's my growth compared to the market, or what's my share of market, or what's my share of voice? How do we ladder up some little small activation to reach that? If I'm working with influencers or creators and they're putting content out online, it's great to look at the engagement rate, and that's great, and it gives me a read on the content. But whatever, X number of years ago when I was at Facebook, probably 10 years ago now, we spent our time going around saying there's no correlation between engagement rate and business results. It's an indicator of creative performance, but it's not an indicator of business. So really understanding the KPIs and saying, okay, what's the actual KPI that's relevant? It's probably share of voice, and how does share of voice impact the broader share of voice multi-channel? And that's how you talk to people in the boardroom as well, because that's the numbers that they start to understand, and that enables you to put everything on a level playing field. Things that I can measure in one way and things that I can measure in a different way. You need to come together at some point.
Yeah, and you remind me of a couple of conversations I've had on other podcasts with marketers. Like, actually, you remind me of one with Matt Bushby from Just Eat, where he talked about the importance of lead measures. I think everyone wants to jump straight to the lag measure to go, okay, are there customer orders, are there sales, are there signups? But often there's some really good lead measures in digital, like the shift of preference or the shift of kind of how people are spending time on site, not necessarily in an ad, and then looking at how those things actually cause an effect through to sales. And I think we often in digital, we see a metric and we go, okay, we obsess about that metric. When people used to obsess about the number of fans on Facebook, and they obsessed about click-through rate. Whereas in actual fact, I think Facebook ran a study that showed there's also very little correlation between clickers and people that buy, because most people that click are actually probably trying to get off the page, or they didn't mean to click because it's an accident. Advertising works by people seeing something, and then after a while, it maybe nudges them into other behavior. Yet it seems that in digital, we've forgotten, to your very early point in the setup, we've forgotten some of the principles and the way that we think about all types of advertising and marketing, yet we think in digital it's different, and therefore you have to do it entirely different. But if you bring those two worlds together, use the smarter metrics, but don't assume that that is everything, I think that's quite a good way to think about it.
I like to challenge young marketers to explain to me what GRPs are, and not to tell me, well, it's a TV thing and we don't do TV. It's, no, it's to do with reach and frequency, and it's to do with messaging, and it's a really important notion. And the fact that they're mixed up on TV and you can separate them on digital is a big deal. But those fundamentals are so important, talking to a consumer, sending them on a journey enough times through enough channels. Those are the fundamentals that are still relevant. Yeah,
no, I agree. You remind me of when I went for my first job in media, they asked me, as a graduate, they asked me what a TDR was. And at that point, I knew I had no clue. So I just thought I would be slightly cheeky and tongue in cheek. And I said, it's a British owned sports car that I'd like to own once I get a job in advertising. And I thought they would just throw me out of my ear, but they said, actually, we quite liked your kind of humor and your cheek. And then obviously I then learned what it meant very quickly afterwards. So
you're very lucky. You're very lucky because you had a good answer. I can tell you that 20-something years ago, I interviewed for L'Oreal in the same business, the same building I work in today. They asked me about packaging. I don't know what I answered, but I didn't get the job.
But you came back and you did many years later, and now look at where you are. So there's a good lesson there about resilience and kind of keeping on going, right, for people. So we touched on this one a little bit, but I guess, like as you mentioned, when it comes to the boardroom, digital or anything that is numerate and where you can connect data to cloud computing, to BI, to stock control, suddenly it all feels like I've got levers that I can pull, and then more people, operational folks, start to get involved, finance folks start to get involved. How do you find the right way of conveying kind of the data science and the forecasting with getting people to kind of hold their nerve and invest in some things like TikTok Shop? I mean, I'm sure you haven't promised X millions of revenue from TikTok Shop this year, yet the fact that you're doing it, somebody's probably asking the question, should you be putting resources into that? So how do you justify some of this new stuff?
You're spot on with all of those questions. You must have a bug in my office. So I think there's two pieces. I think, I had a coach once a few years ago who said to me, you can never give people enough context. So I think all of those other functions who are outside marketing, you don't give them just the number they need. They want to understand what's going on. They want a bigger picture. They want context. So I think, everybody has the capacity to understand what's happening in marketing, understand the indicators, the KPIs, and how they ladder up. So I think that's the first piece, is making sure that everyone has the bigger context. We can never spend enough time explaining the bigger picture, taking just a little bit of a step back and saying, why are we doing this and how does it fit into everything else? And then your second question on TikTok Shop, you're right, it's an interesting one. And I think the approach we've been taking is, this is a very different way of engaging with consumers and of commerce online. And so what we're saying is, what are the different indicators and what makes it valuable? It's valuable as a media, as content, as engaging with communities, as engaging between individuals. And that has value in and of itself. If people buy or don't buy, that's an added value piece. And so where do you think about it as top of the funnel media? Do you think of it as middle? Or do you think of it as bottom? We have very distinct ways of looking at it. And suddenly when all that gets mixed together, I have to step back again and say, okay, I can measure this in different ways. And depending on the way I measure it, you get a different result.
Yeah, it goes exactly back to what you said earlier, that if you've got the metrics clear and people understand the context of the metrics, then they get why you're doing things rather than just you're spending money and I don't know what it's going to deliver. So L'Oreal's been one of the kind of only a few companies that have kind of invested or started to think about investing in the metaverse as a kind of opportunity to build brand and connect with consumers in this next version of the web. I'd love your kind of thought on it. I find there are a lot of people that are very just like they were with the internet and with mobile. They're just either hugely dismissive about metaverse and like people are not going to walk around with things on their heads, or they are huge advocates of tokenization and crypto and smart contracts, and there's very little in between. So I'm fascinated about how you think about Metaverse Web3.
I'll try and be in between then for you.
Thank you.
I'm not gonna blow it away and say it's a waste of time. I still think it's very, very early in the maturity cycle, and we haven't figured out what the use case is, what the business driver is. I think the first point is that, I don't think anybody even knows what the metaverse is yet. There's that blue company that's renamed itself Meta. They're not the one only. They have a product, and that's one place, and then they're going all in on that. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, I don't know. But I think we can't think of it as just that. And then we have to say, okay, well, how broad do you make it? We have so there's a startup called Modiface that the group acquired in 2018, which is augmented reality technology, which is what we use for all of our virtual try-on technology online and in stores, and also for all of our skin diagnostics. It's augmented reality. It's not virtual reality. Does that count as the metaverse? It could be right on the edge. We do a lot now of online consultations. Particularly when stores were closed, we know that people still needed beauty advisors. And so we wanted them to be able to do that online and talk to somebody and potentially try on the product and be able to buy it. Is that the metaverse? Who knows? It's still real people. You can see them just like you and I are looking at each other. They're not avatars. We've done a couple of conferences in the metaverse. So we've all not put headsets on, but we've all joined kind of virtual conference centers and created our avatars and done some funny dancing and sat down and talked to each other.
Did you use Verbella, or was it something else?
Yes, we did. Exactly.
Yeah, we used that for our company conference, actually.
There you go. So clearly we're on the right track. And that was great fun. And to be honest, what was for me personally the most exciting bit of that was when you sat down at a table and talked to somebody, because it was definitely their voice, even if you're looking at an avatar. So the human component of that is still really, really important. So I think overall there are a lot of different things in the metaverse. We need to kind of tease out the different things, start to test them and play with them. Because as we said before, once you understand how these things work, then you can start to figure out how it fits in the marketing mix, how it works for a consumer. I think just coming blanket and saying the metaverse, crypto, NFTs are the way to go, not quite sure, but there's definitely going to be a place for that. I was just talking to a startup last week who's doing crypto in the online engagement, not-for-profit space. Super interesting, traceability, giving back to charities, giving the consumer control. So I'll plug them. There's a company called whatrocks.co. We're part of our incubator in Paris, but a really interesting space. Lots to learn. I think really understand the tech and the user experience, and then we'll find the use cases for business.
Great. Thank you for that. And just calling out again the fact that L'Oreal invests in incubators to connect with new startups. Unilever does the same, and a few other companies. But I think that's a really smart way to keep ahead and to know how things are going to form. So you mentioned non-for-profit. I know another passion area of yours is kind of connecting the non-for-profit commercial world. And I think you sit on the board of the Children's Society, don't you? And try to bring marketers, a community of marketers to try and hack kind of ways of kind of helping there. So I'd love you to share a little bit about that. And then maybe within that, I'd love to understand what are the things that Lex Bradshaw-Zanger is working on? Like, people listening to this will probably think you've got it all together. You've had an illustrious career. You've got lots of qualifications. You speak very eloquently. I am not going to be able to do that. But of course, all of us are constantly trying to improve and get better at something or many things. So there's two parts to that. But maybe just talk about your Children's Society involvement first, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, so the Children's Society is really interesting. So I got involved with them right at the beginning of lockdown, starting to hear about what they were doing and how they were adapting to going virtual. An organization that runs lots of retail stores that had to close them overnight. That was a big source of funding. An organization that relies on engaging with young people physically that had to move that online. So that was super interesting. And I started to hear about their story. And so what's really interesting about the Children's Society is actually a data point to start with. They run every year something called the Good Childhood Report. And the ONS actually uses this data. The ONS doesn't have data on children's well-being and children's mental health, so the ONS uses their data. And the scary piece that it showed was that from 2009 to 2019, there was a decline in children's well-being in the UK. And well-being is not spas and cucumber on your eyes. It's your mental health. It's how you're feeling supported, how much you're worrying about your future. It's avoiding criminality and poverty and these sort of things. So their big goal is to reverse that in the next 10 years. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And so what got me excited was they need to engage with the private sector and with organizations differently. And so I sit on a board. I don't sit on the board of the Children's Society, but I love them a lot. So what I've brought together is a group of CMOs in London or in the UK who are working with them to help on a couple of different projects to figure out how they accelerate, and bringing all the different things we've talked about, digital knowledge, business modeling, how do you pitch to get different sorts of funding than before, and obviously, and the obvious stuff as well. How do you communicate to young people that are in trouble that need to find the right person to talk to? So it's really purpose driven for me. I really enjoy using my professional skills in a purpose driven environment. I have 3 young girls, and I worry sometimes about their future as well. So yeah, that's what I'm doing, and anybody who's interested should look on their website, because I think it's a wonderful organization that does so many things behind the scenes. On the one hand, looking after kids, but on the other hand, lobbying government to make changes so that their future is better.
Right, super important work. And I think sometimes when we live in our lovely middle-class bubbles, we forget the horrendous poverty and kind of the fact that a lot of kids, as Marcus Rashford showed during the pandemic, that can't even afford a meal or for school meals or whatever. So it's a super important mission. And when you were talking there, it also made me kind of think about connecting some of the dots of what we talked about, in that marketing is involved in everything in business. Most departments have quite a kind of, they kind of start and finish in a certain place, like HR or finance, whereas marketing is creative thinking, it's innovation, it's kind of customer insight, it's kind of growth. There are so many different aspects to it. And if you apply that to a charity, or you apply that to any kind of organization, it really kind of becomes a kind of multiplier and a transformer. So I'm going to finish with one final question, Lex, which would be, like, if you were giving your younger self kind of some advice, maybe when you were going into that first L'Oreal interview and you didn't get it, knowing what you know now, what would you say to that Lex?
That's a tough question. I think if my younger self had looked at me now, or even if I look at myself now, I don't think I could do what I'm doing. There's no plan. There's no innate skill set. There's no miracle to get where you are. I think, I don't think I planned my career. I've been lucky. I've been exposed to opportunities and got there. I also enjoy what I do. I find it intellectually stimulating, which is important, because you've got to really think about what you're doing and enjoy what you do. But giving my younger self career advice. I mean, I'm better at giving other people advice than taking my own.
Yeah.
I think in today's world, you need to have a plan. I think as Eisenhower said, that plans are useless, but planning is everything. So you need to have a plan. The world is super competitive now. You've got to be more eloquent than I am, clearer about where you want to go, even if you change your mind. Having a plan doesn't mean you can't change your mind, but at least it means you're driven and you cut through. A bit like marketing. You've got to speak to a specific audience.
Right.
I've always tried to do 110% of every job I've had, because that's what makes me happy. It's not the titles or the celebrity around it. It's doing a good job, which sometimes is hard.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel satisfied with what I'm doing. And I think probably the last piece is we talked about it before, but learning all the time. You never ever stop learning in marketing. And I think anybody that thinks they've got it under control, I don't know about marketing. I've got lots of super bright people in my teams, and they know more about everything than I do. I'm just lucky I know a little about a lot of things. So I think everybody probably just needs to have a plan, be clear about what it is, even if you change it, and don't ever give up learning.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing so honestly and candidly and vulnerably. Right, I think that is good for a lot of budding marketeers to hear that actually people that didn't have a perfect straight line, and it was more squiggly. And I think your advice there about staying kind of really curious, putting maximum effort in, and making sure that you've got a semblance of a plan. It doesn't need to be, as you say, a straitjacket, but a plan of sorts. It is great advice. And I really enjoyed the kind of the nature of the conversation we've had, going through from kind of the role of kind of marketing within organizations full stop, through to actually how to teach and kind of influence and encourage and acquire a new generation of marketers into this business. Because I know we both know Richie from the School of Marketing, who I interviewed the other day, and there's not enough kind of young people that know anything about our industry, nor are we very good at attracting kind of different, diverse, underprivileged kind of backgrounds. So I think this kind of career should be open to many more people, and I hope by people hearing that story and others that's the message that people take out. So
if marketing is art and science, anybody can be an amazing marketer.
Well said. I think that's a great place to leave the chat. So Lex, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Time for a Reset. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. We'll be back talking to a senior marketeer very soon. Make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes by subscribing on Apple, Spotify or SoundCloud, and leave us a review at timeforareset.co.uk.